Eric Schmitt joins us now via Skype, joining the radio program. Good to see you, Attorney General. Thank you so much for joining us. I really want to understand the records process. And you have, I think, more than anybody that's out there, unique insight into this. I mean, you're running for Senate, and we all understand how important the Senate is, because even if Republicans take back the Senate, it's still going to be barely, I mean, just as much power as Democrats have in the Senate now. But you also understand this as Attorney General from the state's rights perspective. And the juvenile records for serious, violent, felony criminal behavior are usually, from what I have read, are sealed. And they don't really follow over once someone has turned into an adult, age 18. And Tom Tillis and others were talking about this process that takes a long time to unseal these for these cases. Can you enlighten us on how this works?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way in the broadest sense, in kind of 30,000 foot view, it is a longer process. And the idea essentially is that, right, once you hit the age of maturity, 18, having things that happened when you were a minor don't follow with you. But I think that clearly there's probably some things to do to make sure people are aware if there are some things that are happening. But again, we're talking about, Second Amendment fundamental rights. And so I think, taking a step back from the juvenile record issue itself, the Senate and the leadership in particular really needs to pump the brakes, I think, back away from this negotiation. The Democrats, every time they have a policy solution, it involves more power and control. I don't think, these red flag laws really give a green light to gun confiscation. Really, that's what this is. That's what this is all about. And so the Democrats are looking for any kind of victory they can get here, but it's actually not even going down the right path. We ought to really be focusing on prosecuting violent criminals. We ought to be focusing on school security, making sure. And by the way, Dana, it's not that long ago that you had the Black Lives Matter folks and Democrats, when they were talking about funding the police, they meant school resource officers too.
Yep.
Because somehow having police officers in schools was not,
they tried to take them away in our school district. They demanded it. Yeah.
And we've kind of, that debate's only a couple of years old. And conveniently, the Democrats, they're not talking about that now. But that's been a fight that we've had to kind of wage to make sure that, we do have law enforcement in the schools. I think a lot of states are moving towards allowing teachers to be able to defend themselves and their students in the classroom. I mean, I certainly would support that. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to protect kids that don't involve, going after people's Second Amendment rights, their fundamental right, to self-defense. But unfortunately, that's where the debate is, and the Democrats seize on any tragedy, and you can predict in about 30 seconds when something happens, as long as it fits their narrative, they're going to go to the same go-to stuff they've been talking about for a very, very long time, which is taking guns away from law-abiding citizens.
Right. We're talking with Eric Schmitt, Attorney General of my home state, Missouri, also Republican Senate candidate. You can find him at Schmitt for Senate, SCHMITT. I had a Newsweek piece that came out today. I think that the red flag proposals are this. I don't even view this as being a firearm issue anymore. I just think it's one of the most dangerous things ever proposed because of how it eliminates due process. Is it fair to say that this is really, you could apply this to a litany of other issues, firearms not even being chief amongst them?
Well, think about that. If this is abused or going down this path in the first place, denies people, just by way of an accusation, denies people the ability to have these issues play out in a courtroom. And you're talking about now two fundamental rights that are noted in the Constitution, right? The ability to defend yourself, to have a trial by jury, all those sorts of protections that our founders knew were very dangerous if the authorities or the government wanted to really go after people. They wanted to make sure there was a check there that people individually could protect their rights. And then, of course, the Second Amendment's enshrined, which that right predates the Constitution, right? You can go back historically, the Glorious Revolution in England, where they're talking about these issues about people are born with the right to be able to defend themselves and their families. And Dana, it's also worth noting, and we may get this decision on Monday or Wednesday. We'll certainly get it in June in the New York pistol and rifle case. Our office took the lead on briefing that case. In the Heller decision 15 years ago, the court made it very clear that the Second Amendment is an individual right. This whole well-regulated militia distraction that the left always tries to throw up, it's an individual right. Some of the lower courts have kind of chipped away at that, saying, well, maybe that doesn't extend outside the home. You've got these restrictive regimes, permitting regimes in places like New York, where you have to go to the government, some bureaucrat, and prove that you're in danger or have some special circumstance to have a concealed carry permit.
Right.
That's clearly unconstitutional, and I think the court's going to rule that way. So you have this debate we're having right now with the backdrop of the Supreme Court likely to make sure that the Second Amendment is in fact strengthened.
Yeah.
And so I think for all those reasons, the Senate ought to, just walk away from the table here.
Yeah, and
And
by
the way,
yeah.
and talk about mental health issues. Talk about and make sure that our schools are secure. Make sure we have the resources for school resource officers. All those things, should be talked about on the table.
And that's where the incentive should come in. And I should point out, because, the red flag law that we were talking about, and I'm going to get into the Title 42 after this question, but the red flag laws that we were talking about, this incentivizing of states to adopt this, it seems to me like they're trying to sidestep 10th Amendment rights. And it just so happens, you were instrumental in pushing the Missouri this protection of the Second Amendment, which is essentially like an affirmation that I understand it of 10th Amendment. The Second Amendment Preservation Act in Missouri was saying, look, if you have a federal program that the government's trying to push, you're not going to demand, especially as it relates to guns, you're not going to demand that Missouri pay for this. And now I have to say that your chief challenger for the Senate primary actually opposed that, using mom's demand language verbatim in multiple interviews, and also made the Capitol a gun-free zone, in addition to refusing to support constitutional carry. So it seems like he would be more in line with Mitt Romney and Lindsey Graham. But you've been instrumental in pushing that, and I just wanted to get kind of your thoughts on the importance of states' rights as it relates to this. Why can't they incentivize and use with grants, school securities, SROs? Like, why can't they do that?
Yeah, I think this is an attempt to sort of nationalize or federalize what people want to have happen in D.C. and all 50 states. And that's not what the federal government was intended to be. It was supposed to be a government of limited powers. The states all kind of agreed on what those powers are. I know we're going to talk about border security. Mm-hmm. That happens to be one of them. Certainly not this kind of stuff. And so the states can figure this stuff out. They can make their own laws. But the states cannot make laws. When you have a constitutional right enshrined in the Second Amendment, we're seeing this in the New York case. It doesn't give you the right to violate people's Second Amendment rights. Right. And so, yes, this is a states' rights issue. This is also, just sort of at the core of our Constitution. And the founders were very well aware that the passions of the people, people getting riled up about things, that you needed these structural safeguards that would stand the test of time, so that you didn't have people aggregate power and come up with solutions that are just about control, which is what the Democrats are pushing. And hopefully, Republicans don't go along with it.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so as well. Yeah, seeing the age raise as well. That's, again, punishment without due process, when we could just look at those records. Okay, I want to ask about Title 42, and I say this because you've been, again, instrumental in this also. They're calling it the largest caravan ever. It's over 10,000 now. It's at Mexico and Guatemala's border. And by the time they said it gets up to the southern border of the United States, it's going to be 15,000 plus strong. Now, the latest, as I understand, there was the federal judge in Louisiana that had this preliminary injunction to make the president so he couldn't remove it. But what is your view as to how, and again, you were involved in that, what is your view of what's going to happen because they've appealed it? What's going to happen now with Title 42? What's going to happen with this caravan?
Well, they actually, interestingly, have not appealed that yet. We expect them to. They're not fast-tracked. They haven't, They have not
That's
asked
a first.
They have not asked for an expedited review, which is a bit telling here. I think they've probably seen the poll numbers on this issue of illegal immigration. But so that's a little bit of a tell, I think, where the Justice Department and the Biden administration is. But the good news is we did win a couple weeks ago. We initially had a temporary restraining order because the Biden administration was actually looking to reverse Title 42 before the date that they said they were going to in mid-May. We got a preliminary injunction. Missouri, Arizona, and Louisiana led that charge, and a bunch of other states joined in. And, I've always viewed Missouri as a proxy for all the other states in the union. Every state's a border state because the problems that come across the border, the crime, the fentanyl, the human trafficking, all of that, it doesn't stop in El Paso. You know that, Dana. It ends up in Festus. It ends up in,
where I was born,
Dayton, Ohio. All of those places. We've seen now fentanyl, drug overdose is the number one killer of 18 to 45-year-olds. And so all of this is happening because the cartels are running the show. These, of course, these caravans are very, very problematic, and we predicted this. This is at the height now of this. Some of these happen in cycles, right, where you have surges of illegal immigration typically, but you have to have strong leadership to turn it away. There are people being interviewed saying Joe Biden's going to reverse Title 42. We're going to get in.
How do they even know about that? There are Americans that can't even define what Title 42 is. How did they know about that?
That's right. Well, this is the lack of leadership. When you sort of, say, hey, you can come here because it's part of their, grand design. This is what happens. And so there were three big pieces that President Trump had that, gave us a secure border. The Remain in Mexico policy. We were victorious with Texas on that. That's actually in front of the Supreme Court again. They're going to rule on that next couple of weeks. You've got the border wall. Missouri and Texas have filed a lawsuit to actually make them spend the money that Congress appropriated to finish the border wall. And then you've got Title 42. And Title 42 is a big one, Dana, because it accounts for about 50% of all the expulsions. So you think we've seen waves of illegal immigration before? We would see a tsunami. And Lieutenant Governor Patrick in Texas, I'm going to steal this from him. If you were to take away all those protections and extrapolate out those numbers over a 4-year term for Joe Biden, that's 30 million people. That is a state of Texas. That's 5 Missouris. And so when you put that in that kind of context, people are right to be very concerned about this because the crime, fentanyl, all those bad things end up everywhere across the country. And we've got to have a secure border. And I don't know about you, I'm tired of being lectured by all the folks in D.C. about the sovereignty of other countries' borders. And then they turn a blind eye to the sovereignty of our own southern border. It's time and I think that's what it means by being America first.
There you go, right there. Eric Schmitt, Missouri's Attorney General and Republican Senate candidate. We really need you in the Senate because there's nobody that knows these issues as well as you do and has been consistent, not just for political convenience either, that's been consistent on these issues like you have. Schmitt for Senate. Thank you so much, sir. Good to talk with you.
Thanks, Dana. Good to see you.